Hey guys, tonight we arrive at a windswept hill in medieval Scotland, where the sky has exactly one setting, gray and drizzly. You're soaked through your woolen cloak, yes, the scratchy kind, and your boots have absorbed enough water to qualify as small ponds. The road behind you is little more than mud with aspirations, and ahead, crouched on a rise, is your destination. An abbey of stone and moss, squat and damp and somehow both welcoming and resentful of your arrival. You're here because you've heard strange things, that the monks at this abbey do more than chant psalms and illuminate manuscripts. Something about steam, barrels, a smell like burned porridge, but fruitier, and maybe a few oddly happy sheep. You wouldn't be the first to wonder if the rumors are true. Inside the cloister, the air warms only slightly. Candles flicker as if bothered by your presence. A robed figure nods at you without smiling. It's the monastic version of enthusiasm, and leads you through a passage where the walls sweat with condensation. Somewhere deep in the stone belly of the abbey, there's a muffled clang and a hiss. That's not Gregorian chanting. The monk who greets you in the workroom has arms like wine barrels and a face lined from decades of either piety or proximity to open flame. Brother Seamus. He gestures vaguely toward a steaming copper vessel that looks suspiciously non-biblical. Experiment, he says. You nod, though it smells like someone's cooking bread and forgets to stop. The room is thick with yeasty mist, like the world's most confusing bakery. Your eyes sting, your nose twitches, and just as you're about to ask why there's a sheep tethered by the doorway, the monk dips a ladle into a wooden tub of barley mash and sloshes it into the copper still. You've never seen barley so respected, or so thoroughly boiled. It turns out monks didn't just pray and transcribe in these stone cocoons. They grew herbs, made medicine, copied recipes, and when sufficiently bored, tinkered with things no one had names for yet. In northern monasteries, barley was plentiful and easy to store, but bread got boring. So why not try soaking it in water, then heating it, then accidentally inventing something that burns slightly on the way down? This wasn't unheard of. Historians still argue whether early distillation came from Moorish alchemists, traveling apothecaries, or the deep genius of someone who didn't label their jars properly. But here in this Scottish abbey, a convergence happened. Monks with time, grain, and access to oddly shaped vessels intended for perfume or herbal extracts. Brother Seamus squints as he explains the warming properties of the result. You hold a tiny cup, rough clay, chipped and sniff. Your nose hairs singe gently, you sip, then cough. It's like drinking a campfire through a straw. You get used to it, he mutters, not unsympathetically. But you don't, not yet. You sit on a damp bench as the rain continues to pitter outside, and the monks go about their quietly revolutionary business. There's no thunderbolt of realization here, no divine voice proclaiming, "Lo, ye have invented whiskey." Just damp robes, bubbling mash, and a vague hope that the next batch will go down smoother. There's no clear recipe, of course, not yet. Just some barley, water, maybe a whisper of yeast, and a lot of guesswork. No one writes it down because the church isn't fond of potions that make you smile for no reason. And besides, they still aren't sure what they've made. Is it medicine, a digestive tonic, a prank? But it's warm, and it's here. And in a world of cold stones, sour porridge, and the constant threat of Vikings, that counts for something. A bell tolls distantly, time for prayer. Brother Seamus leaves you with a friendly grunt and a cup full of questionable theology. Outside, the rain has lightened to a fine mist, and you imagine that for the monks, this is as good as sunshine gets. As you lean against the cold stone, your breath steaming, a thought occurs to you. Someone, centuries from now, will build a glass palace just to honor what's being quietly invented here. But tonight, in this soggy corner of Scotland, it's just a strange-smelling room and a monk who may or may not be slightly buzzed. You wake to the sound of rhythmic sloshing and the gentle clink of metal on stone. Well, you weren't exactly asleep. You were just letting your thoughts soften around the edges while the warmth of that first sip did laps around your insides. But now you're fully alert, in the loosest possible sense of the word, because something in this abbey smells like toasted porridge left on a campfire. It turns out you're just in time for the morning mash. Barley again, always barley. You get the sense that if you dreamt in this place long enough, your dreams would come malted. The workroom is dim, mist curling off the floor like it's plotting something. Monks shuffle about, robes swaying, some humming under their breath. Brother Seamus is back, sleeves rolled, stirring a great vat of soaking barley and water with what looks like an oar. This is not a recipe born from elegance. It's born from necessity and, perhaps more importantly, boredom. Monastic life is an unchanging rhythm of prayer, labor, and long silent meals where nobody makes eye contact with the pickled turnips. So when one curious brother decided to heat up the soaked grain mash just to see what it would do, the bar was low, but the results unusually flammable. You squat by the fire watching as the steam thickens. It's not just heat thereafter. Something happens when the mash reaches a certain bubble. It's alchemy, though they'd never dare call it that. The church was rather testy about alchemy unless it involved wine and the blood of Christ. That said, these monks weren't stupid. They read. They copied manuscripts, including ones from far-off lands. Arab scholars had been distilling perfumes and medicinal waters for centuries using tools called alembics. Historians still argue whether those ancient designs traveled to Celtic lands through traders, pilgrims, or just extremely curious monks who liked to build things. Here, though, the copper contraption in use looks more like a teapot that lost a bet with a thunderstorm. It's squat, lumpy, patched with tin. A funnel-like cap captures the rising vapors, which snake their way into a cooled pipe. The end result? A liquid more aggressive than holy water and only slightly less judgmental. The monks don't drink it openly, of course not. This is a holy place. But behind the firewood stacks and under the pretense of digestive aid, cups are passed, grimaces are shared, and a few gentle belches make it into the silence between vespers. You watch as Brother Angus, tall, silent, with a beard like a mossy broom, gently taps the side of the still. He grins when a clear drop appears at the spout and plinks into a wooden bowl. "Angels share," he murmurs. You're not sure what that means, but it sounds like a polite euphemism for the bit that vanishes into the air. You suspect angels, if they are watching, are mildly intrigued. At some point, you're given a task. Stir the mash. Just slowly, always clockwise, never too quickly or it clumps. It smells like breakfast left too long in the sun. The ore you're handed is polished from years of turning barley into something not quite solid, not quite liquid, and definitely not soup. And yet you're oddly calm. The motion is meditative, the smells earthy and strange, and the murmured chant from a nearby chapel creeps through the stones like a lullaby with too many Latin verbs. A few feet away, Brother Fergus scribbles something in a ledger. You peek. It's not a proper recipe, just observations. Mash bubbled too soon. New mash less angry. Added extra sprigs no one noticed. The notes are somewhere between cookery and confession. A quirky fact of the morning. One of the brothers swears that a bit of heather helps mellow the flavor. Another insists it gives the whiskey the scent of damp socks near a peat fire, which, curiously, is a compliment in this part of the world. You try another sip, it's slightly smoother. Less bite, more warmth, like drinking autumn. Brother Seamus watches you, his eyes twinkling above a face that hasn't smiled in decades. "You'll last," he says, and pats your shoulder with a hand that smells faintly of yeast and soot. Outside, rain begins again. Of course it does. But inside, the bubbling continues. The mash thickens. The vapors rise. And somewhere in all this, a group of bored, barley-obsessed monks are inching toward a discovery that will someday fill pub shelves across continents. You wouldn't know it now, as the room fills with steam and the soft mumbling of the pater noster, but you're witnessing the slow birth of whiskey. Not through intention, not yet, but through the patient curiosity of men with too many rainy days and a suspicious amount of barley. The Abbey's stone corridors never really dry. Even on a clear day, if such a day exists here, the damp clings to the walls like a sermon that won't end. But today, the workroom feels warmer than usual. Not cozy exactly. More like the kind of warmth that comes from too many monks clustered around a questionable experiment. You follow the scent, part porridge, part bonfire, part something else entirely. Sweet maybe, burnt sweet, like someone tried to caramelize oats and then panicked halfway through. Inside the brew room, a new device has been rigged up. At the center of it, a copper pot, patched like a pilgrim's sandal, resting on bricks and wrapped in damp cloths. One monk ladles the barley mash into it with the care of someone handling hot custard. Another fans the fire beneath, while Brother Seamus watches with folded arms, as if willing it to do something meaningful. And then you see it. A single, glistening droplet condenses at the tip of a curved pipe and falls with the softest plink into a waiting clay bowl. As they all lean forward, another drop follows. Then another. It's slow, almost mockingly slow, but it's working. "Praise be," says Brother Angus, though he says it in the tone of a man whose toes are soaked and whose optimism is on a tight leash. Distillation, a word they haven't invented yet but are nonetheless performing. Boiling the mash so the alcohol evaporates, capturing the vapor in a cooled tube and watching it drip back into the world in liquid form. They don't know the chemistry, but they understand one thing. This version hits harder. You're handed the bowl, still warm, still faintly steaming, and encouraged to take the tiniest of sips. It's sharper than before, less muddy. There's a strange clarity to it now, still a bit like drinking a broom cupboard, but with purpose. Cleaner, mutters Seamus, and more effective. One of the younger monks, Brother Cyaran, insists it makes his joints feel less creaky. Another says it helps with sleep, though you suspect it's the kind of sleep that involves a lot of snoring and possibly forgetting your own name for a few hours. They try it warm, they try it cold. They try adding herbs, honey, even a little milk, an experiment that ends with a unanimous vote of never again. Meanwhile, the copper still is improved daily. One monk adds a coiled pipe for better cooling. Another suggests raising the fire for stronger vapors. They test batch after batch. Some are smoother, some are spicy. One is described only as what sin might taste like if it was pickled. Historians still argue whether this process originated here or was borrowed from ancient texts. Some claim a lost Roman scroll described early distillation. Others argue that Moorish medical texts, copied by monastic scribes, carried the secret in the margins. Regardless, this abbey doesn't know it's creating the blueprint for centuries of joyous inebriation. And here's the thing, they're not even doing it to get drunk. At least, not officially. No, their intention is noble. Healing elixirs, digestive tonics, remedies for chills and melancholy. You know, monastic things. Still, there's a definite sparkle in Brother Fergus's eyes after 2 sips, and he begins humming hymns slightly off-key. They make up names to justify it. Aqua Vitae, the water of life. Sounds spiritual, right? Nothing unholy about life-giving water that just happens to make your knees wobbly. A quirky moment of the day. Brother Dougal attempts to infuse the brew with rose petals, hoping for a gentler bouquet. Instead, it smells like garden perfume trapped in a chimney. No one finishes their cup. The experiment is quietly retired, and Dougal isn't allowed near the herbs for a week. By late afternoon, steam hangs thick in the air. The stone walls glisten and the floorboards are slick underfoot. Someone slips. It's not dignified, but it's very much on brand for this process. You help clean up, ladling spent mash into a trough outside. The sheep eye it suspiciously. Inside, the still continues to work, slow, steady, deliberate. It's mesmerizing to watch, like a monastery hourglass, and just as quietly the monks begin treating it as part of their routine, like prayer but grainier. The abbey's bell rings for evening prayer, and the brothers file out with steaming cups tucked into their sleeves. The brew may still be unnamed, unregulated, and slightly illegal, but it has become a part of their day. And you're warm, woozy, and trying to decide if you've just witnessed a minor miracle or a long series of damp accidents. Either way, the drops keep falling. The sun peeks out for 5 cautious minutes the next morning, just enough time for the damp moss to sigh and spread further along the abbey walls. You shuffle into the workroom, still bleary from the combination of late-night distillations and a monk's idea of a mattress, which, let's face it, is basically a bag of turnips with a guilt complex. Today's experiments have shifted focus. There's a new theory going around. If the spirit is strong enough to make your ears ring, perhaps it can heal as well. Brother Seamus greets you with a thump on the back and a small wooden cup already half full. The liquid looks like slightly offended rainwater, but apparently it's been refined. You sip. Your eyes water. Somewhere in your chest, a radiator turns on. "It's medicinal," he says, with the tone of a man who's convinced himself of this just often enough. Monks have always dabbled in healing. Salves for burns, teas for digestion, suspicious pastes for rashes nobody likes to talk about. So it makes sense they'd add whiskey to the list. Fever, a dram, cough, another, melancholy, perhaps two. Nobody can be sad when they're gently numb from the eyebrows down. The brothers begin experimenting in earnest. They stir whiskey into tinctures of mint, blend it with honey, and even mix it with vinegar for reasons no one can properly defend. Brother Angus claims it cured his foot ache. Brother Fergus says it helped with romantic frustrations, though the less said about that the better. And here's the surprising part. It does have benefits. Alcohol has antiseptic properties, after all. Applied to wounds or ingested in moderation, it might reduce infection, might ease discomfort, might, if nothing else, make you forget about the rat that chewed a hole in your sandals. One monk, Brother Nevin, begins sketching little drawings of intestines in the margins of a psalter. Next to them, he notes how certain batches of whiskey made his digestion feel clearer and his flatulence more obedient. It's either the birth of medical documentation or the world's first drunken doodle. Historians still debate whether this is where whiskey medicine truly began. Some argue that Irish monks were already using it as a disinfectant. Others believe it developed in tandem across several religious communities. No one agrees, mostly because the original records are scribbled on parchment that later became bookmarks for psalters or mouse nests. And yes, this early whiskey tastes aggressive, no caramel finish, no hints of oak or vanilla, just the raw enthusiasm of burnt grain with a slightly judgmental aftertaste. But that doesn't stop the monks from pouring it into vials, bottles, and once, regrettably, a hollowed-out turnip. You assist in preparing one of their more ambitious cures, a healing draught that includes whiskey, chamomile, fennel, and a pinch of salt. Brother Sayaran insists it tastes like warm health. You drink it. It tastes like fermented regret. But your sore throat does feel better. Later that day, a sick traveler arrives at the abbey gates. Fevered and pale, he's welcomed in with quiet hospitality and a careful dram of the monk's strongest batch. They rub a bit on his chest, too, for good measure. He sleeps for 12 hours straight, wakes up, and declares he saw angels, possibly just steam. A quirky tidbit of the day. One monk swears by adding whiskey to his morning porridge. "Makes the oats friendlier," he says, spooning down what is essentially barley on barley. The church, of course, would disapprove. Officially, alcohol use is for ceremonial wine and medicinal tinctures, both preferably blessed and, ideally, unexciting. So the monks describe their whiskey as a warm-toned decoction with spiritual undertones, which is a fancy way of saying, it tastes like sin but helps your cough. That night the brothers gather around the hearth, each with a cup and an opinion. Theories fly. Perhaps the spirit clears bad humors. Perhaps it flushes sin from the bloodstream. Brother Fergus posits that it might deter demons. Brother Seamus says it mostly deters conversation. There's laughter, actual laughter in a monastery, soft, brief, but genuine. You realize something, this odd invention isn't just medicine. It's a balm against the dreary sameness of monastic life, against cold stones and colder sermons, against the kind of silence that sometimes grows teeth. And maybe, just maybe, the monks are inventing more than whiskey. Maybe they're rediscovering joy. You awake to a thud, a sheep bleeding somewhere it shouldn't, and the unmistakable gurgle of a satisfied monk. It's barely dawn, and already the abbey is humming with quiet activity. But today feels different. There's a ripple in the rhythm, a subtle buzz, like someone found a particularly sharp quill or remembered how to laugh without being reprimanded. Word, it seems, has spread. The villagers from the nearby glen, tough, weather-battered folk who usually treat the monastery like a seasonal obstacle course, have started showing up. Not for confession, not for alms, for curiosity, and maybe for something that smells slightly toasted and leaves your ears ringing. The abbey doesn't advertise. No signs point toward the whiskey room, but news travels the way smoke does, slowly, everywhere, and with a hint of mischief. A shepherd shows up with a sore shoulder. A baker claims his cough is worsening. A widow with mysteriously great balance asks if Brother Seamus is accepting patients. They're not here for doctrine. You watch from the cloister as Brother Fergus ladles a cautious dram into a wooden cup for the village blacksmith. The man sniffs it like it's a candle, shrugs, and tosses it back. His face does something between a sneeze and a revelation. That'll do, he rasps. And just like that, the monks have unofficial customers. Of course, they don't call it selling. That would be unseemly. It's sharing for the sake of health. Though a few visitors do leave behind mysterious gifts, a bolt of cloth, a basket of eggs, a suspiciously clean piglet. No one mentions payment, but the abbey kitchen is suddenly better stocked. Historians still debate whether this moment, the casual offering of whiskey to outsiders, marks the drink's true social debut. Some argue it began in trade ports, others in royal courts. But here, in the smoky quiet of a Scottish monastery, it's being poured by hand to grateful, slightly red-faced locals who no longer mind the rain quite as much. A quirky tidbit: one village elder insists the whiskey made him dream of his long-dead goat, who offered forgiveness and a turnip. The monks record this solemnly. Might be a vision, might be dehydration. You help with the next batch, now brewed in double volume. The copper still wheezes from the strain. Brother Syaran adds more cool water through a spout improvised from an old bellows tube. The drip, drip, drip of spirit into the bowl is faster now, but still not enough to keep up with demand. To maintain decorum, they invent rules. No more than 2 cups per guest. Drink must be sipped in silence, no toasts. And no, Brother Fergus, you cannot call it holy juice. But the villagers keep returning. One even brings a clay jug for takeaway. Brother Seamus glares but fills it anyway. You sit on the steps of the cloister that evening, cup warming your hands, and watch the last of the visitors shuffle back down the hill. They move more slowly, but somehow with straighter backs. One whistles a bit of a hymn, off-key but enthusiastic. Inside, the monks tally the unexpected bounty. Turnips, cheese, a goat that won't stop chewing on a broom. The whiskey was never meant to be currency. But here it is, soothing coughs, warming bones, and just maybe binding the abbey to its neighbors in a way the Psalms never quite managed. You overhear Brother Dougal mutter, "Suppose we're merchants now." Brother Seamus grunts, "Only if you can tie the headache." And just like that, you realize the monastery hasn't just created a spirit, it's created a reputation. You don't hear them coming. Church authorities have a way of appearing like a cold draft. One minute, the abbey hums along with its usual mix of incense, barley steam, and low humming. The next, a rider in black robes and a skeptical expression is handing his reins to a baffled novice and asking if the abbot is receiving visitors. A few nervous glances. The monks do their best to look innocent, which is difficult when your main workshop smells like baked beer and your storage room contains enough digestive tonic to make half of Scotland nap on its side. Brother Seamus wipes his hands on his robe, which only spreads the barley stains. Brother Fergus pretends to be deeply invested in sweeping nothing in particular. Brother Cyaran whispers, "Is now a good time to pretend we're herbalists?" The visitor, a church inspector from a nearby diocese, comes bearing letters sealed in red wax and the kind of face that has never once smiled on purpose. His name is Father Albin, and he's here on behalf of ecclesiastical dignity, moral uprightness, and an interest in reports of unsanctioned fermentations. You are quickly recruited to look busy by copying psalms in a scriptorium that has seen more whiskey notes in the margins than actual prayers lately. Father Albin is thorough. He pokes through the herb garden, inspects the cellar, and eventually sniffs suspiciously around the distillation room. "What is this vessel for?" he asks, staring at the copper still as if it's about to confess its sins. Brother Seamus replies without blinking, "Vapor purification for medicinal barley waters." The inspector squints. "Medicinal barley waters," he repeats. "Spiritual balm," Brother Fergus chimes in. "A digestive remedy," Cyaran adds, "for monks with chronic humors." The room falls quiet. Historians still argue whether monks across Europe coordinated explanations for their brewing practices, or if each abbey simply invented its own excuses under pressure. Either way, the term aqua vitae starts showing up in more and more records, vague, Latin-sounding, and just medical enough to escape outright bans. Father Albin is not entirely convinced. He insists on sampling the remedy, which results in him coughing so hard he knocks over a bucket and has to sit down for a while. "You serve this to the infirm," he rasps. "Only in small quantities," Seamus assures him, "often diluted with blessed water." There's a tense pause, then a quieter one, then, miraculously, Father Albin nods. I suppose it could ward off certain damp ailments. The monks nod solemnly, the way only men who know they've just dodged a papal-sized arrow can. A quirky tidbit of the day. After his inspection, Father Alban is shown to a guest cell for the night. The next morning, his complaints about the bedding are oddly absent, and he asks for just a little more of that remedy before his departure. For the road, of course. The monks are emboldened. They begin referring to the still as the vessel of clarity. The copper is polished. A plaque is briefly considered, then quietly forgotten when it's decided that would be a bit much. But the scare has taught them something important. Plausible deniability is the key to ecclesiastical survival. So the drink is never just whiskey. It's a restorative, a draft, a concoction, and if anyone official ever asks again, it's a tonic reserved for those suffering from vapors of the chest. You help copy a new label for one of the clay jugs, aqua vitae, for rooms, weak constitutions, and foggy spirits. It's a masterpiece of vagueness. From this point forward, the operation becomes more organized. Monks are assigned to specific tasks. Brother Dougal, whose handwriting is suspiciously illegible, is barred from labeling anything. Brother Sayaran is put in charge of blessing the still, which mainly involves humming a psalm off-key while adjusting the fire. The villagers continue to arrive quietly and gratefully. The monks serve them with subdued joy and the occasional wink. And in the corner, hidden behind stacks of dried herbs, a locked chest begins to fill with scrolls detailing ratios, heating times, and yeast combinations, all under the heading, monastic remedies. It's not exactly a rebellion. It's more of a holy workaround. And as you sip a newly clarified draft that evening, you can't help but admire their genius. After all, who else could convince the church that whiskey is a sacrament? By now, the distillery, that is, the medicinal preparation room, has become a centerpiece of the abbey, even if no one dares call it that aloud. You follow Brother Fergus through the chilly corridor, its floor slick with centuries of drizzle, toward the scriptorium. Not to pray, not to copy sermons, but to find a scroll. You see, the recipe is starting to change. Subtle tweaks, warmer water, longer fermentation, different barley roasting. And with change comes risk. If they lose the process, it could take weeks, maybe months, to rediscover that exact balance between warmth, sting, and that unmistakable smooth second sip afterglow. So naturally, someone decided to write it down. Unfortunately, someone also decided to hide it. Brother Fergus insists the scroll is safe. He wrote it himself, after all, but forgot precisely where. Possibly tucked between the Psalms and a commentary on St. Cuthbert's habit of arguing with birds. Or maybe in the margins of a medical text that now doubles as a pillow for Brother Angus during midday naps. You begin the search with the kind of reverence reserved for saints, relics, and bread that hasn't gone stale. Scroll after scroll, psalter after psalter. Most are dusty, some are illegible, and several are far too philosophical to hide a barley mash ratio. Then comes a clue. In the back of a hymn book, wedged beneath a sketch of what appears to be a smiling turnip, you find it. 3 lines. scrawled in ink made from nettle and vinegar, in handwriting that suggests Brother Fergus was either drunk or trying to communicate with bees. Igrain 3 hands to water, too. Let rest by moon, fire just before dawn. That's it, no signature, no title, no mention of yeast, just vague gestures and lunar suggestions. A quirky tidbit, one marginal note simply reads, "Do not use the fat barley, it bites." No one knows what that means, but it's now monastery policy to avoid anything labeled fat. You transcribe the lines onto a cleaner scroll and tuck it carefully into a leather pouch sewn into the binding of a thick theology tome. Because nothing says plausible deniability like hiding your moonshine recipe inside Augustine's city of God. Meanwhile, Brother Cioran is developing symbols, tiny inked marks that indicate batch variations, spirals for sweeter, dots for strong, little stars for needs prayer. A new scroll emerges, marks of spiritual potency, complete with miniature faces illustrating each level of warmth, from mildly pleasant to unexpected euphoria. Historians still argue whether these markings evolved into the tasting notes used centuries later by distillers: earthy, peaty, nutty, fiery. Or if it all began here with a monk simply drawing a surprised chicken face next to an overly bold batch. You help catalog the variations. Some are poetic. This one sings of rain and oak. Others are more practical, tastes like Brother Dougal's sandals. But they matter. Each brew tells a story. Each still produces a slightly different mood. And in a monastery where days rarely differ, this becomes its own quiet thrill. The idea of writing it down, of preserving the process, is revolutionary in a place built on repetition. Monks don't usually innovate. They copy, they maintain, but whiskey encourages memory, curiosity, a little heresy, perhaps, in the form of a better morning draft. One evening, you find Brother Seamus alone in the scriptorium, holding the original scroll. He doesn't look up when he says, "Strange, isn't it? We pray for eternal truths, yet chase perfection one drop at a time." You nod, because really, what else is there to do when a monk waxes poetic over a fermented beverage? He rolls the scroll, tucks it into a hollowed section of the bench, and covers it with a hymnal. Just in case. That night, the fire crackles louder. The barley mash bubbles like it knows it's now part of something bigger, and the steam rising from the copper still feels almost proud. The monks might not remember which saint lost his teeth in Wales, or who transcribed the last 3 psalms upside down, but they will remember this recipe. And now, so will you. It begins, as most legends don't, with a sheep. The monastery's eastern courtyard has always doubled as a grazing patch, not out of luxury, but because monks are pragmatic, and grass is grass whether it grows in God's garden or between flagstones. Several scruffy sheep spend their days chewing contemplatively and making theologians question the concept of inner peace. One of these sheep, an overconfident ram with a twisted horn and a knack for finding unlocked doors, wanders where he absolutely should not. You are midway through skimming the latest barley mash with Brother Dougal when the bleeding starts. At first it's distant, then it gets emphatic, panicked even, followed by a tremendous clang, a slosh, and what can only be described as a wet thump. You dash toward the noise. A barrel has been knocked over. The still's cover is slightly askew, and in the middle of it all stands the ram, blinking slowly, with a foam of grain and spirit coating his lower jaw. He looks both immensely proud and profoundly confused. Brother Sayuran gasps. He drank the draught. Not the spirit itself, thankfully. That's still dripping at its usual glacial pace into a separate bowl. But the spent grain mash, which, as it turns out, retains just enough alcohol to make a medium-sized sheep feel bold, philosophical, and deeply uncoordinated. Within minutes, the ram begins to sway. Then he bolts, not out of fear, not out of purpose, but with the glorious aimlessness of a creature suddenly aware of its knees. You all sprint after him, Brother Seamus leading the charge, robes flapping, yelling something that might be a prayer or an insult. The sheep lurches into the cloister, slips, rights himself, and continues at a diagonal sprint through the nave. A line of novices part like the Red Sea. The ram eventually collides with a barrel of apples and collapses into what could only be described as an improvised cider lounge. No one is hurt, not even the sheep, but a hush falls over the monastery. You sit beside the dazed creature. His breath smells like hot porridge and mischief. The monks gather, circling in silence. A Brother Dougal scratches his beard. Do we confess this? Brother Angus answers, only if he does. That night the story is told and retold. The ram's adventure becomes a minor legend. Someone dubs him Saint Benedict. Someone else insists the ram was drawn by divine thirst. Brother Fergus makes a crude sketch of the moment, which ends up pinned in the scriptorium under the label The Ecstasy of the Sheep. Historians still argue whether this incident led to official bans on livestock near brewhouses, or whether it inspired certain distilling superstitions, like never stirring the mash counterclockwise or offering a first drop to the earth. Regardless, from that day on, the sheep are watched more closely. A small wooden gate is installed to block the brewroom entrance. It doesn't quite latch, but it sends a message. A quirky tidbit. Brother Seamus claims the ram was actually more coordinated than usual post-incident. Didn't walk into the same fence for 3 whole days. And just like that, the monastery gains not just a recipe, but a tale. The tale of a curious sheep, a toppled barrel, and the moment when whiskey earned its first unofficial endorsement from the animal kingdom. It becomes the kind of memory that monks whisper during chores, chuckling softly to themselves. That time when the sacred and the ridiculous met face to face, and the ridiculous bleated. Later, as the stars stretch above the damp stone courtyard, you lean on the sill of your sleeping cell. You can just see the sheep pen now tightly latched. And in the moonlight, that same ram raises his head and blinks slowly in your direction. Like he remembers. You wake to the sound of wooden wheels crunching over gravel. Pilgrims. A whole caravan of them, trundling up the abbey's long incline like determined snails, their carts packed with walking sticks, patched cloaks, and that particular smell of damp cheese and old leather that only the devout seem to carry. They're here for rest, for prayer, and though they won't say it aloud, for that mysterious medicinal tonic they've heard whispers of along the road. Pilgrimage routes in medieval Scotland are less like highways and more like gossip trails, and word of the monk's warming draught has trickled out, not through marketing, but through murmured stories exchanged over fire pits, scratched into the margins of wayfinder scrolls, or shared by innkeepers who can't remember where they tasted that burning oat water, but want more. The abbey, of course, has rules. Pilgrims are offered shelter, bread, and spiritual guidance. But this influx has brought questions. Could they perhaps leave a token of thanks for the digestive solution? Say, a carved spoon, a woven belt, a goose. Brother Seamus is growing wary of how many geese they now have. You assist in the guest quarter. Pilgrims line up not for relics, but for drafts. They speak of cold bones, tight chests, and travel fatigue, all conveniently treatable with a dram or two of aqua vitae. Brother Fergus, half proud and half panicked, has started rationing. The still runs from dawn till dusk now, tended in shifts like a sacred fire. The barter economy blossoms. One pilgrim offers a hand-drawn map in exchange for a sealed flask. Another trades a pack of dried apples. One simply sings a haunting tune in Gaelic no one quite understands, but everyone feels better afterward. A quirky tidbit, a merchant tries to pay with blessed wax teeth, which turn out to be poorly shaped candles. He gets half a cup and a politely raised eyebrow. You learn the ropes, how to keep the still at just the right simmer, how to cool the copper piping with damp cloths, how to judge when the spirit is too excitable to bottle. The monks develop a quiet pride. There are no labels, no grand declarations, but each flask handed to a weary traveler carries the weight of care. A soft invitation. Rest, warm up, forget the blisters for a while. And yet, the line between comfort and commerce begins to blur. One evening, Brother Sayaran, staring into the embers, murmurs, "Are we still healing? Or are we just good at trading now?" Historians still argue whether monastic whiskey was ever officially part of medieval pilgrimage life. Some say it was tolerated, even encouraged, as long as it was called medicine. Others argue that these trades skirted the edge of sin and survival. But whatever the truth, it's happening here now. You meet a wandering French friar named Etienne who insists his home abbey infuses wine with wormwood for courage. He tries the monk's spirit, coughs violently, and declares it liquid absolution. He offers a scrap of parchment, a recipe for a digestive syrup flavored with cloves and orange peel. Exotic, curious, definitely worth trying in the next batch. And so the recipe grows, bits from travelers, notes from dreams, adjustments inspired by fatigue or inspiration. One blend includes blackcurrant leaves, another tries toasted oats. One tragically includes nettles, never again. The abbey's spirit becomes both fixed and fluid, a tradition in motion, no batch identical yet always familiar. At night, after the pilgrims have settled, you join Brother Seamus on the bench by the cloister archway. He hands you a cup, and together you sip in silence, watching the stars fuzz slightly with each swallow. Below, a pilgrim coughs, another laughs. Someone begins to hum that same Gaelic tune. And the abbey, for all its rules and routines, pulses with something alive, something quietly rebellious. You think maybe the true miracle isn't in the brewing, but in how a few drops can turn weary travelers into guests, strangers into friends, and monks into something a little more human. The next arrival isn't a pilgrim. It's a man in fur-trimmed sleeves and boots too clean for these roads. He doesn't speak much, but his horse does, snorting like it resents the climb, flicking its tail with aristocratic offense. He carries a seal on a leather string around his neck, a royal seal, which means one thing: the taxman has come calling. A Brother Seamus greets him with the warmth of an undercooked turnip. "Peace be with you," he says, which here roughly translates to, "What now?" The taxman, Sir Cedric, he says, bows and flashes the kind of smile that hasn't been near humility in years. "A word of your herbal tonics has reached the court. You try to disappear behind a barrel. Cedric isn't here for the draft. He's here for the ledger. Taxes, duties, tariffs, those words that make monks reach instinctively for prayer beads and plausible deniability. He requests to inspect all operations related to trade and production of consumable goods, which is an extremely long way of saying, "I know you're making something valuable, and I want a piece." Brother Fergus coughs nervously into his robe. The monks scramble. Recipes are hidden, barrels relabeled. One flask is hastily marked ointment for ankle swelling in Latin. Another is buried under a sack of onions. You're recruited to help reclassify the inventory. Suddenly, the jars of spirit become sacramental balms. The scrolls are notes on barley-related theology. And the still, it's repurposed in theory as a humidifier for respiratory wellness. A quirky tidbit: someone places a wooden cross atop the still. A bold move, possibly sacrilegious, but Cedric nods approvingly. Then he asks to see the accounts. This is trickier, because technically the monks don't sell the spirit, but gifts have been exchanged, services rendered. A goose here, a wheel of cheese there, and of course no one writes that down, except, apparently, Brother Dougal, who keeps extremely honest records in a journal labeled for memory, not tax. Cedric flips through it, eyes narrowing at the entry. Received 3 cloaks, 2 hens, and a spoon for 1 bottle, mildly smoky batch. Seamus steps in quickly. "Pilgrims leave what they wish. We do not charge." Cedric raises an eyebrow. "Even so, His Majesty's tariffs apply to all beverage production above subsistence levels, especially those containing spirits." The word hangs in the air like the smell of overcooked mash. Historians still argue whether such early taxation of spirits was deliberate or just another excuse to fill royal coffers. Some say kings had learned of distilled drinks from returning crusaders. Others believe it was purely fiscal instinct. If people like it, tax it. Either way, the Abbey's brew is on the radar now. To buy time, the monks present Cedric with a peace offering, a bottle wrapped in linen, labeled in the vaguest possible Latin. He uncorks it, sniffs, coughs once. Then, in a moment of bureaucratic generosity, he pronounces it suitable for ecclesiastical exemption, pending further clarification. A translation. He doesn't want to admit he enjoyed it. Before leaving, Cedric delivers a warning. If this becomes trade, proper trade, it must be declared. He leaves on his disdainful horse, his seal glinting in the afternoon sun. The monks wait until he's out of sight before exhaling. Brother Syaron mutters, "We should bless the still again." Brother Seamus rubs his forehead, "We should hide it in the library." That evening, the still is cleaned more thoroughly than ever before. A new batch bubbles with slightly more urgency, and the monks gather for what is now an official ritual. The tasting, the noting, the quiet laughter over what was once barley and is now balm for body and bureaucracy alike. You sit with them, your cup warm in your hand, and realize something sobering. Whiskey is now a risk. Not just a curiosity, not just a comfort, but a reason for scrutiny. And still no one stops. Because for all the paperwork, the fear, the official stamps and seal waving, nothing quite compares to the moment that first drop touches the tongue. No decree can take that away. There's a term whispered now among the monks, the angels share. You first hear it from Brother Fergus while he's peering into the rafters with narrowed eyes, as if divine beings might be hiding behind the cobwebs, sipping from invisible goblets. The angels, he murmurs, they take their portion from every barrel. You blink, then look at the half-empty cask. It's not theft, it's evaporation. As the whiskey rests, as it breathes in the cool, damp air of the Abbey's undercroft, some of it simply vanishes. Into the air, into the stone, into myth. It's expected, accepted, but not fully understood. Brother Seamus has a more grounded theory. It's the wood, leaks, or perhaps the wind. But even he says it with a shrug, like someone arguing with fog. This loss, soothingly rebranded as a heavenly tax, becomes a curious obsession. Casks are measured. Lids are checked. One monk even tries wrapping a barrel in oilcloth, which only causes it to sweat and turn the whiskey into something that smells like wet socks. A quirky tidbit, Brother Dougal briefly suggests plugging evaporation gaps with beeswax. He tests it on a small cask. The next day, the wax has vanished. No one knows if it melted or if the sheep ate it. Meanwhile, other missing spirits begin to occur. Brother Syaron swears a batch he'd set aside for flavor testing is now mysteriously lighter. "Angels," he says flatly, while giving Brother Fergus a very specific look. You come to learn that angels are blamed for many things. Sticky fingers, slight hangovers, and one entirely vanished clay jug that was later found behind the choir stalls, suspiciously empty. Historians still debate whether early distillers genuinely believed in the angels, share, or simply used it as a poetic excuse. Some suggest it reflects a spiritual reverence for the process. Others see it as the medieval version of "the dog ate my liquor." The monks now guard their barrels like relics. Small chalk marks are placed to track levels. Brother Angus carves tiny notches into the barrel hoops. You assist in organizing them by date, strength, and mood. Yes, mood. Each cask is labeled not just with its contents, but its perceived personality. Bold, shy, pious, but with a rebellious streak. And then one night, something happens. A faint thump, a rustle. You and Brother Seamus investigate. In the storage alcove, by candlelight, you find nothing. No spilled whiskey, no broken barrels, just a sense that something or someone has been here. The air smells faintly sweet like spirit and ash. Brother Seamus raises his eyebrows. Well, either we've got angels, he says, or Brother Fergus sleepwalks. The next morning, a note is pinned to the still. Share and be still, the angels. It's written in awkward Latin and ink that smells suspiciously like mulberry juice. Quirky pranks aside, the idea of the angels share sticks. It becomes a kind of superstition, a tradition. Every new batch is blessed not just for purity, but with a small toast, an unspoken offering to the unseen. One dram poured gently onto the earth. For the angels, Brother Sayaran says, deadpan, as it soaks into the moss. And somehow that makes it feel right, balanced, as though in creating something so carefully, so soulfully, you must acknowledge what you cannot keep, what must be given away. As the days stretch and the barrels age, the monks lean into the mystery. Not every cask will yield its full measure. Some will be taken by air, by time, or by cheeky novices with poor impulse control. But some will survive, mellow, deepen. And the rest, well, let the angels have their sip. It starts with a whisper, as these things always do. A merchant passes through the abbey gates one fog-heavy morning. He carries textiles, trinkets, and news. Always news. This time it's not of war or plague or who's been excommunicated this week. It's something far more curious. There's talk, he says over a steaming bowl of barley gruel, of spirit makers down south, abbey folk copying your methods. A Brother Seamus stiffens slightly. Copying. Or perhaps, inspired by, the merchant says, with the vague smirk of someone who doesn't wish to be stabbed with a ladle. The room goes quiet. You can practically hear the steam rising from the porridge. Soon more rumors arrive. A letter from a distant cousin. A note scribbled in the margins of a hymn book passed between abbeys. Stories of copper vessels, bubbling mash, and monks with suspiciously cheerful postures. It's a spreading. Other monasteries, some just valleys away, others across seas, have begun distilling. Their own takes, their own blends. Some are calling it aqua ardens, burning water. Others just call it the good stuff. The monks here are torn. A Brother Fergus is insulted. We invented it. Brother Dougal shrugs. We borrowed a still design from the herbalist in Arbroath. Brother Sayaran, ever the philosopher, sips a dram and says, perhaps the spirit wants to be free. You observe as curiosity slowly overtakes irritation. Scrolls are consulted. Notes are compared. An old missive from an Irish abbey mentions adding juniper. A wandering friar from the lowlands swears by peat smoke. Someone hears a tale of a Welsh monk who distills indoors using sheep bladders as cooling sacks. That one doesn't catch on. Historians still argue whether these scattered developments were parallel discoveries or ripples from one original still. Some posit that distillation knowledge had already trickled in from alchemical texts, and the Scots, and Irish and Welsh and who knows else, simply stumbled upon different versions of the same idea. But inside this abbey, pride is tinged with delight. Their strange, slightly heretical invention is no longer confined to mossy walls and curious sheep. It's out there, in the world, making its way in cloisters and cellars, whispered over firesides, and, if the merchant is to be believed, even served very cautiously in certain noble courts. A quirky tidbit: one abbey in the Northern Isles begins flavoring their whiskey with seaweed, claiming oceanic enlightenment. The result is either briny genius or liquid kelp, depending on who you ask. Back at your monastery, the air is thick with determination. The monks don't want to be left behind by their own accidental invention. They begin innovating again. Brother Seamus alters the still's angle to improve vapor flow. Brother Cyaran experiments with double distillation, though one attempt leaves a bench scorched and a robe permanently crisped. A new record book is created, the Concordance of Spirituous Endeavors. Bound in worn calfskin, it contains charts, diagrams, and more than one sketch of a barrel wearing a halo. And with this expansion comes something new: competition. Pilgrims now mention other monasteries' spirits, compare flavors, some flatter, some sting. "Your whiskey is lovely," one traveler says, "but have you tried the one from St. Mura-S? Like drinking smoke and sunlight." Brother Fergus sulks for an hour. You suggest a blind taste test. 4 flasks, no labels. Seamus wins twice. He says nothing but walks a bit taller the next day. Despite themselves, the monks are proud. Not because they were first, but because they still care. Every drop matters. Every batch is a prayer and a poem and a scientific fluke all in one. You help polish the copper still. It's old now, dented, patched in places with thin strips of pewter and hope, but it works, it still hums. As the sun sets through the cloister arches, you sip from a warm cup. The spirit glows faintly like captured fire. The monks laugh nearby, quietly, of course, in proper monastic moderation. Their invention has traveled. But home is here, in the gentle hiss of boiling mash, in the echo of chant, in the steam rising like incense from a copper spout, drop by precious drop. Rain agains. It slides down the abbey's slate roof in long, lazy rivulets, tapping the stone with the gentle insistence of a hymn sung half asleep. You're inside the brew room, your second home now, watching Brother Dougal frown at a pile of vegetables. "Parsnips," he says, as if the word itself is a provocation. You peer closer. They're lumpy, pale, and slightly offended by the damp. "We're trying a new mash," he explains. "Barley-s in short supply, thought we'd branch out." You've learned to fear Dougal's experiments. This one, however, has institutional support. kind of. Brother Seamus is away on monastery errands, and Dougal has taken the silence as permission. So parsnips it is. The process starts like any other batch: peel, chop, soak, stir. Except the parsnips never quite stop smelling like regret. There's a sweetness, sure, but underneath it, a damp cellar note that promises future apologies. You help boil the mash. The usual copper still is scrubbed, polished, and prepared for its brush with vegetable history. Brother Sayaran offers incense to ward off the root spirits, he says solemnly. The first batch drips slowly. It's clear, innocent-looking. The scent, like roasted carrots, had an identity crisis. Dougal hands you a cup with theatrical flourish. You sip. It tastes like someone tried to ferment soup. It's earthy, faintly sweet, and underneath it all, a bitterness that clings to your teeth like a bad sermon. You stare into the cup. Maybe it just needs time, you offer, ever hopeful. Nope, Dougal says, already pouring it back into the mash to strengthen the soul. Historians still argue whether early distillers experimented widely with vegetables, or if this was a uniquely questionable moment in one Scottish abbey. There are passing references to turnip ale and beetroot wine in obscure texts, but no one else ever mentions parsnip whiskey again. Later that afternoon, the still hisses unusually. A wisp of smoke curls from its spout, not steam. Smoke. The monks rush in. The parsnip batch is overheating. Brother Fergus throws a rag over the copper. Dougal yells something about aromatic integrity. You open a window to vent the smell, which now resembles overcooked stew and damp socks. The still lets out a whoomp, not an explosion, but a definite tantrum. A scorch mark is left on the wall, one wooden bench is singed, and Dougal's robe now features a dramatic and permanent brown stripe across the hem. No one is injured. The batch is buried, literally. Behind the herb garden, a small cross is planted out of sheer habit. Brother Seamus returns the next morning, sniffing the air. Something burn. Everyone shrugs in unison. The experiment is never repeated. Still, there's a lesson. Whiskey, like holiness, resists shortcuts. It prefers patience, familiarity, and ingredients that don't grow underground while plotting revenge. A quirky tidbit: a novice monk swears that a drop of the parsnip batch cured his hiccups. Brother Fergus replies, "So would being struck by lightning." You spend the evening cleaning the still. It rattles slightly now, as if offended. A bit of copper needs rebending. A joint needs resealing. But the fire beneath it still warms the room. The barley sack, freshly delivered, waits quietly in the corner like a long-lost friend. You breathe in. Grain, smoke, ash, not a vegetable in sight. Balance is restored. They arrive on horseback, unannounced but unmistakable. Not tacksmen this time, not pilgrims either. These visitors wear wool cloaks too fine to be humble and boots that haven't seen a muddy hill in weeks. One of them wears a brooch carved from horn, the kind passed only between titled hands. The abbey, as always, greets them with polite suspicion. Brother Seamus straightens his robe. Brother Dougal disappears behind a stack of kindling, whispering, "Not again." Their leader steps forward. A tall man with a well-groomed beard and the look of someone who's read the Bible and commissioned a tapestry about it. He introduces himself only as Alastair, with the kind of tone that expects you to already know who he is. He's not just any nobleman. He's a royal cousin. Possibly a second son, possibly disgraced, definitely curious. He doesn't ask for a tour of the chapel. He doesn't inquire after relics. He asks instead for the monk's infamous warming elixir. You, Brother Sairon, and the still are suddenly very popular. A flask is prepared carefully. It's a good batch, aged 3 weeks longer than usual, stored in a cherrywood cask that once held dried plums. The monks call it the Ember. You don't label it, of course, no need. Its scent alone would get it excommunicated from any formal sacrament. Alasdair samples it under the cloister archway, seated on a borrowed stool that creaks beneath his layered dignity. He raises the cup to his nose, sniffs with the gravity of a priest before communion, then sips. The pause. Then a soft exhale, like a man letting go of a long-held secret. Very subtle, he says, hints of ash and something honest. The monks glance at each other. Honest is new. He drinks again, no flinching, no theatrics, just a slow, appreciative nod. Keep making this, he says, quietly. That evening he dines with the monks. Porridge, root stew, and a blessing cup passed once around. Even Brother Dougal is on his best behavior, which mostly involves not mentioning parsnips. Alasdair doesn't preach. He doesn't lecture, he listens. He asks about the still, its age, its design. He fingers the patched copper pipe with a familiarity that suggests he's seen similar contraptions before. Others are trying, he murmurs, but they haven't got this soul. The monks beam. Historians still argue whether Alasdair's visit was official or personal. Some suggest he was scouting for royal procurement. Others claim he merely sought warmth in a cold season. But there are records, vague, unsigned, but suggestive, of certain Highland courts suddenly developing a fondness for monastic drafts of depth and courage. The next morning he leaves early, quiet as he came. At the edge of the path, just before disappearing into the morning mist, he turns in the saddle. I was never here, he says. And then he's gone. The monks return to their chores with renewed energy. The still hums gently. A fresh batch begins, and you swear the mash bubbles a little more eagerly. A quirky tidbit. Someone paints a tiny crown on the bottom of the flask Alasdair used. Brother Sairon discovers it 3 weeks later and simply whispers, blasphemous, but tasteful. That night, under the dull glow of rushlight candles, you help transcribe a new entry in the recipe scroll. No changes to ingredients, no dramatic adjustments, just a small note in the margin. Best served with quiet company, and never to those who ask too many questions. You close the scroll. Outside, a low wind tugs at the eaves. Inside, the still breathes its soft copper sigh, and the fire crackles just once. For all the changes, visitors, tax threats, noble noses, the abbey remains itself. And the spirit still honest. Even monasteries have bad days. Storms tear through the hills. Wind rattles the wooden shutters like a particularly persistent beggar. The mash room floods twice. Brother Dougal slips on a turnip and lands in a pail of barley, emerging looking like a scone left out in the rain. And yet through the noise, the repairs, the grumbling of sheep, the still keeps working. The whiskey survives, which frankly is more than can be said for many other things in the medieval world. Kings rise and fall. Borders shift like wet laundry on a line. But the monks here keep their fire low, their spirits high, and their spirits, well, strong. News arrives on a frayed scrap of parchment. A nearby monastery, St. Aldwyn's, has been shuttered, not for heresy, not even for parsnips, just a slow trickle of sickness and silence. No one came, no one stayed. The copper still was sold, the scrolls used for kindling. You feel it in your chest like a cold wind, a reminder nothing lasts. But this abbey, still standing, still distilling. Whiskey has become their quiet defiance, against decay, against forgetfulness, against the idea that monks are only meant to copy and kneel. And yes, there are days when the batch goes wrong, when the fire sputters, when the mash turns, when someone forgets to filter the dram and a novice nearly swallows a beetle. But even those days end with a shared sip, a muttered prayer, and the soft creak of benches under weary bodies. You help Brother Seamus patch a leak in the still. His hands are older now. Yours are steadier. You work in silence, punctuated only by the comforting hiss of hot copper returning to form. Later, you walk the perimeter of the abbey, cup in hand. The evening air smells of wood smoke, sheep, and wet moss. Familiar things. Inside, Brother Cyaran is adding annotations to the now venerable recipe scroll. Not changes, just thoughts. Tried warmer fire, felt calmer, might be weather-related. Beside it, a sketch of a smiling barrel. Historians still argue whether the monks of this unnamed Scottish abbey knew what they were doing. Whether they were scientists in robes, or just men who liked warm drinks. Some say the earliest distillers were driven by alchemical curiosity. Others claim they were simply cold and done with watered-down beer. The truth, it may be both. You think of the sheep, of the villagers, of the nobleman who wasn't here. You think of Father Albin's second letter. Yes, he wrote back, not to scold, but to inquire whether his chest remedy might be obtained again discreetly. A quirky final detail. The scroll now ends with a phrase written in uneven Latin, likely by Brother Dougal, Spiritus Fortis, Somnis Suavis. A strong spirit, gentle sleep. And that really says it all. Tonight, as the final dram is poured, the fire banked, and the steam fades into the stone, you lean your head against the cool wall and listen. To the quiet, the drip, the slow, deep breathing of an abbey that outlasted famine, disapproval, and one extremely drunk sheep. And tomorrow, the barley waits. The still is ready. The story continues. So now, in the hush that follows the last tale, let your mind drift, slowly, like the rising mist over those cold stone hills. The monks have gone to their cells. The fire is no longer crackling, just murmuring, soft embers breathing their last warmth into the room. Outside, the rain has stopped, a rare moment of stillness, the kind of night where time slows, where footsteps soften, where the only thing louder than silence is memory. You've walked through a forgotten chapter, one not written in gilded scrolls or royal decrees, but in steam and sweetness and patient hands that stirred warmth into the cold. You've seen the barley boiled, the copper shine, the mistakes forgiven and tasted. You've heard laughter echo in stone halls, watched sheep stagger, and felt the weight of something deeply human in those quiet cups passed hand to hand. And maybe, just maybe, you're feeling a little warmer yourself, a little soothed. You can let your eyes close now. Let the sounds fall away. Let the edges blur. The spirit, the one from barley and the one inside you, has done its work. Tomorrow will come, with new stories, new weather, new batches. But for now, all that remains is this soft breath of air through an open window, the slow pulse of rest, and the gentle comfort of knowing you've just spent time in a world where nothing rushed and everything mattered. Sleep well,